Good morning. We're going to talk today about what's known as Obamacare, and we'll probably give you some names that you haven't been familiar with. So this has an interesting history. We'll start back with its origin, and that was heritage care. Now, what is heritage care? Something you haven't heard of, I'm sure. Well, this was an invention of the Heritage Foundation, which is a well-known, respected, conservative institution. And this is the place that Obamacare originated. It was something that was obviously meant to ensure that insurance companies would remain the dominant force in financing in the United States. And it was clearly an attempt to head off the possibility of a single payer sometimes in the future, which is something that all other countries have. And in the United States, we have this in Medicare. There's just one payer, and it's something that's been around a while. Had some rocky starts, but they've worked things out pretty well, and it covers everybody. Has a very, very low administration cost, several percent, and it actually uses the private enterprise to administer it. A private company is chosen. It changes from time to time, and they administer the whole thing as well as they can, and the results at least are efficient. Whether they're fair or not is something else, but they are efficient. So pretty well Heritage Care saw this in the possible future, and it set up an interesting theory method by which the insurance companies would cover everybody. And this then morphed into Romneycare, that you probably have heard about in the state of Massachusetts. It was an interesting situation. You had a state which was heavily Democrat. You had a Republican governor who was at that time a centrist, and they worked things out together, and they used those principles started by Heritage to come up with a plan for the state. And you know what? It worked pretty well. Now, there were certain conditions that allowed it to. One is the fact that the Republican governor and the Democrat legislature were in accord, and they cooperated with each other. The other one was that in Massachusetts there was a heavy penetration of insurance also, and there were no predatory insurance companies, and there was nobody who was really trying to tear it apart, and it worked reasonably fine. It was not discussed much in the presidential campaign for reasons of their own. Each side thought it would be better not to talk that much about it, but there was not a problem. What's called Obamacare now was an attempt by the Democrats to use the principles of Romneycare to extend to the entire United States. This was a rough battle. There was a lot of trading behind the scenes, a lot of anger, a lot of conflict, and at the end, this translated into Scott Brown care. Now, what in the world is Scott Brown care? Well, Teddy Kennedy died, and a special election was taken, and Scott Brown won. He was a Republican in a Democrat state, and this changed the balance of power in the Senate. just enough to make it hard to complete the whole negotiation and determining the final form of the bill. And the Democrats went to a rather unusual method, and they were able to do the last part of the structure, and they, however, were not able to put certain things in practice, which would have helped it. So it did pass by this maneuver, but it was sort of a crippled bill. The next phase was Roberts-Care. Now, what's Roberts-Care? Well, it went to the Supreme Court, and they allowed the Obamacare to continue on a rather interesting interpretation. But Justice Roberts, who was a very smart guy, very, very smart guy, allowed it to continue, but with another crippling feature, which allowed the states to opt out of the Medicaid programs, which allowed the poor to be taken care of. And in this process, this allowed the states to opt out of programs where this was bizarre that they would do so, since the federal government was going to provide almost all the money, but it allowed it so that for political reasons this attack could occur. So now we have Obamacare coming up, and under a lot of controversy and a lot of opposition. So what we have is pretty much like driving a car with the brakes fully on. It is will be very hard to administer. You also see a lot of guerrilla warfare. You see companies that, as a matter of policy, are decreasing the working hours of their employees so that they would not qualify under the program. This not only creates havoc in the whole medical system, but also makes it very difficult for employees to have a living wage and to persist. And there's very little indication that this type of guerrilla warfare will stop. And of course, we have the threat right now of the nuclear bomb, that if Obamacare continues, the government will be shut down. So it's not a good situation. And there is not an easy solution. It's a matter of determining the least bad program to go to, and how we would get to the least bad result. What's the mechanism? Is there any way to do this? Pick this up next time.